I've been a forest ranger at Blackmore National Park for nearly 15 years now. 15 years of the same winding paths, ancient trees, and changeable British weather. I know every trail, every stream, every rock formation in my sector. At least, I thought I did. Do you ever get that feeling when you're alone in nature that something's watching you? Most times, it's just your mind playing tricks. But sometimes, sometimes I'm not so sure. The rain's coming down rather heavily tonight, isn't it? Reminds me of that night 3 months ago. I haven't told many people about this. Perhaps I shouldn't be telling you either. But there's something about the patter of raindrops that makes confessions flow more easily. It was late October. We had an unusually warm autumn. But that particular evening, the temperature had dropped suddenly. The rain started around 4 in the afternoon, and by nightfall, it was absolutely hammering down. The kind of rain that seems to have a grudge against the earth. I was supposed to be off duty. Actually, my colleague Martin had the night shift, but he called in with a nasty bout of flu. So there I was, driving back to the ranger station after what should have been my final round of the day. The windscreen wipers on my Land Rover were working overtime, and visibility was poor, to say the least. The rain created this constant, hypnotic drumming on the roof. If you're listening to this in similar weather, you'll know exactly what I mean. The call came through on my radio at precisely 8:43 p.m. I remember checking my watch when I heard the crackle of static. Station to Ranger Taylor. Come in, Ranger Taylor. It was Diane, our night dispatcher. Something in her voice sounded off. Taylor here. Go ahead, Diane. We've got a distress call from a hiker. Young woman. Sounds quite panicked. Says her boyfriend has gone missing on the Blackwood Trail. Can you respond? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Blackwood Trail runs through the oldest section of the forest. It's beautiful during daylight hours. But at night, especially in weather like this, it's not somewhere you want to be lost. Coordinates. I asked, already turned the vehicle around. She's at the Dead Man's Crossing lookout point. Or at least, that's where she claims to be. There was something odd about the way Diane said claims to be, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. On my way, ETA 15 minutes. Be careful, James, Diane added, which was unusual. We don't typically use first names over the radio. Something doesn't feel right about this one. The rain seemed to intensify as I drove toward Blackwood Trail. Have you ever noticed how sounds change in heavy rain? Everything becomes muffled, distant, except for the rain itself, which somehow becomes louder, more insistent. Dead Man's Crossing is a rocky outcrop that offers a spectacular view of the valley during the day. At night in a storm, it's just a dangerous, slippery ledge jutting out over darkness. It got its charming name back in the 1800s when a local man allegedly met the devil there during a midnight storm. Old folk tales say they made some sort of deal. Nonsense, of course, but names stick. I parked as close as I could and grabbed my heavy-duty torch, emergency kit, and raincoat. The moment I stepped out of the vehicle, the rain hit me like a physical force. Within seconds, despite my waterproofs, I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. My torch cut a weak yellow path through the darkness as I made my way up the trail. The normally firm path had become a small stream, mud and water cascading down toward the valley. My boots squelched with every step, and I had to grasp at tree trunks to keep my balance. Hello. I called out every few meters. Park Ranger. Anyone there? The rain swallowed my voice. It was like shouting into a thick blanket. My heart was starting to beat faster now. not from exertion. I've walked these paths 1,000 times, but from something else, a growing unease. When I finally reached Dead Man's Crossing, I swept my torch across the area. There was no one there. Hello? I called again, louder this time. Is anyone here? I'm a park ranger. Nothing. Just the relentless drumming of the rain. I radioed back to Diane. I'm at the lookout point. There's no one here. Static crackled for a moment before Diane's voice came through, breaking up slightly. That's impossible. She called just before I contacted you. Well, she's not here now. I replied, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. I was soaked through, despite my waterproofs. Are you sure she said Dead Man's Crossing? Positive, Diane confirmed. Wait there. I'll try calling her mobile again. I clicked off the radio and scanned the area once more with my torch. That's when I noticed something reflective among the rocks. I carefully made my way over, mindful of the slippery surface, and bent down to examine it. It was a mobile phone in a bright pink case. The screen was cracked, but it was still on, showing several missed calls from an unknown number, presumably our dispatcher. Next to the phone was a small silver bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. I picked both items up, a sense of dread building in my chest. Where was the owner? I radioed Diane again. I found a mobile phone and a bracelet, but no sign of anyone. What was the name of the caller? Emma, Diane replied. Emma Whitaker. I checked the phone. The lock screen showed a photo of a young couple, a blonde woman and a dark-haired man, both in hiking gear, smiling broadly at the camera. They looked to be in their mid-20s. I think this is her phone, I said, but she's not here. No sign of anyone. There was a pause before Diane responded. James, we need to treat this as a missing persons case now. I'm calling in backup and search teams. My torch beam caught something else. A small splatter of what looked like blood on one of the rocks. Fresh enough that the rain hadn't completely washed it away. Diane, I said, my voice tight. I think we might have an injury as well. I found what appears to be blood. Understood. Stay where you are until backup arrives. I should have followed protocol. I should have stayed put. But something caught my attention. A faint noise coming from the trail that leads deeper into the forest, away from the main path. It sounded almost like crying. I'm going to check something out, I told Diane. Someone might be nearby. James, wait for backup. I clicked off the radio, immediately regretting the unprofessional move. But the crying sound came again, slightly louder. Someone needed help. The trail leading away from Dead Man's Crossing is not an official park route. It's overgrown, barely visible even in daylight. At night, in the rain, it was practically invisible. But I've walked these woods for 15 years. I know my way, or so I thought. My torch beam bounced off wet leaves and branches as I moved forward, calling out periodically. The crying sound seemed to stay just ahead of me, never getting closer despite my quickening pace. 10 minutes into this ill-advised pursuit, I realized something was wrong. Very wrong. The trees here were different, older, somehow, more gnarled. Blackmore has some ancient woodland, but nothing like what I was seeing now. And the spacing was wrong. The entire layout felt alien. My heart began to pound against my rib cage. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, mixing with the rainwater already streaming down my face. I stopped walking. The crying stopped too. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The rain continued its relentless drumming, but underneath it, there was now a profound silence. No night birds. No rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth. Nothing. Hello. I called out, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. This is Park Ranger Taylor. If you can hear me, please respond. A twig snapped somewhere to my left. I swung my torch toward the sound. For a split second, just a fraction of a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing between two trees. Not the lost hiker. Not anyone who should be in these woods. It was tall, too tall and thin. Its limbs seemed wrong, somehow too jointed, too flexible. And its face, the torch beam passed over empty space. Nothing there, just trees and rain and darkness. My radio crackled, making me jump. Ranger Taylor, come in. Where are you? It was Diane, sounding worried now. I fumbled with the radio, almost dropping it with my trembling hands. I'm on the unofficial trail past Dead Man's Crossing, following what sounded like someone crying. James, get back to the lookout point now. Search team is 10 minutes out. Oh, roger that. I stammered, turning around to head back, except I couldn't find my way back. The trail I had been following was gone. In its place was dense forest that looked nothing like the Blackmoor I knew. My torch beam revealed unfamiliar trees, unfamiliar rock formations, unfamiliar everything. Have you ever been lost in a place you thought you knew intimately? There's a special kind of terror to it, a fundamental rawness that makes your brain rebel. I checked my compass. According to it, I should head east to get back to the lookout point. I started walking, trying to control my breathing, trying to convince myself I'd just gotten turned around in the darkness and rain. 5 minutes of walking brought me to a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a single tree, an oak, I think, though it was hard to tell in the darkness. What caught my attention was what was hanging from one of the lower branches. A bright yellow raincoat, the exact same model as the one I was wearing. I approached slowly, my torch beam fixed on the garment. It swayed slightly in the breeze, water dripping from its hem. When I got closer, I could see a name tag on the breast pocket. Ranger J. Taylor. My knees nearly gave out. That was my spare raincoat, the one that should be hanging in my locker bag at the ranger station, 15 miles away. The radio in my hand burst into static, so loud I dropped it. Through the white noise, I could just make out Diane's voice, but the words were unintelligible. The static grew louder, then changed pitch, becoming almost like laughter? No, that couldn't be right. I backed away from the tree, from my raincoat that couldn't possibly be there, and bumped into something solid. Something that hadn't been behind me a moment ago. My body went rigid with fear. I could feel breath on the back of my neck. Warm breath in the cold, rainy night. Are you lost, Ranger Taylor? A voice whispered. So close to my ear I could feel lips brushing against it. It wasn't a human voice. It had too many layers, too many tones, all speaking at once. And it knew my name. I ran. Blind panic took over, and I just ran. Branches whipped against my face. I slipped in mud, fell, scrambled back up, and kept running. My torch was gone, lost somewhere in my mad dash. The darkness was near total now, broken only by occasional flashes of distant lightning. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and distort. But eventually, I burst out onto a familiar trail, the main Blackwood path. In the distance, I could see flashing lights. The search team had arrived. As I staggered toward them, relief flooding through me, my radio crackled one last time. "Found you," said that many-layered voice, and then went silent. The official report states that Emma Whitaker was never found. Her boyfriend, Michael Perkins, was discovered the next morning, wandering along the main road 5 miles from the park entrance. He was dehydrated, confused, and had no memory of what happened after they reached Dead Man's Crossing. The only statement he would make was, "It wasn't Emma. It looked like her, but it wasn't her." We searched for weeks. No sign of Emma was ever found, except for that phone and bracelet I discovered. As for what I experienced in the woods that night, it never made it into any official report. Who would believe it? I told my colleagues I'd gotten lost in the storm while looking for the missing hikers. They ribbed me about it for weeks. The veteran ranger who lost his way in his own park. But here's the thing. That spare raincoat? It's still missing from my locker. And sometimes when I'm on patrol during rainy nights like this one, I catch glimpses of yellow through the trees. Just flashes of bright color in the corner of my eye. And sometimes, very rarely, I hear cry in the woods. So if you're ever hiking in Blackmore National Park and you hear someone calling for help during a rainstorm, well, I'd think twice before following that voice. Some things in these old forests are better left alone. The rain's getting heavier now, isn't it? I should probably let you go. But before I do, that noise you've been hearing in the background for the last few minutes, that's not part of the rainfall. Someone's been knocking at my door this entire time, and I live alone miles from the nearest neighbor. Excuse me, I should probably answer it. The rain's been falling steadily for hours now. It creates a soothing rhythm on the roof of my cabin, though there's nothing soothing about the memories it brings. You see, I've been a ranger at Whispering Pines National Park for 23 years, and all that time, I've only encountered one thing I cannot explain. One thing that still keeps me awake on nights like this. When the rain falls and the wind howls through the ancient trees outside, have you ever been alone in the wilderness? Truly alone? There's a particular quality to that solitude, a weight to it. Most find it peaceful. I used to. Now, I find myself glancing over my shoulder far too often. It happened 3 years ago. Late November. We had an unseasonably cold autumn, and the first snow had already dusted the higher elevations of the park. Down in the valleys, it was just bitterly cold rain, much like tonight, the kind that seeps into your clothes no matter how good your waterproofs are, that finds its way down your collar and into your boots until you're chilled to the bone. Most hikers know better than to venture deep into the park during such weather. But there's always someone who overestimates their abilities or underestimates nature. That November, it was a young man named Daniel Ashcroft. Daniel was 28, an experienced hiker, according to his girlfriend, who reported him missing after he failed to check in at their arranged time. He'd set out 3 days earlier for what was supposed to be a 4-day solo trek through the northern section of the park, a challenging route even in good weather. He'd promised to use his satellite phone to check in each evening. On the third night, no call came. I was the senior ranger on duty. When the call came through, the girlfriend, Melissa was her name, was frantic. Said it wasn't like Daniel to miss a check-in. He was methodical, reliable. He knows what he's doing, she kept saying, her voice cracking. Something's wrong. I know something's wrong. Protocol dictates we wait 24 hours before initiating a search for an adult. But with the weather conditions deteriorating and night falling, I decided to begin preparations immediately. By dawn, we had assembled 3 search teams. I led the team heading to Daniel's last known location, a camping area near Blackwater Ridge. The rain had been falling steadily for hours by the time we set out. The forest was draped in mist, the tall pines looming like spectral sentinels above us. Every sound was dampened, creating that peculiar hush that comes with heavy rainfall in dense woodland. Just a constant patter of droplets on leaves and the occasional call between team members breaking the silence. We reached Blackwater Ridge by midday. No sign of Daniel's camp, according to his girlfriend. He had planned to spend his second night there before heading deeper into the park. We spread out, conducting a thorough sweep of the area. It was Ranger Collins who found the first clue, a hiking boot, men's size 11, half buried in mud near the edge of a steep ravine. It matched the description of Daniel's gear. My stomach knotted as I examined the boot. It was intact, no damage, no blood, just abandoned in the mud. Had Daniel fallen into the ravine? We peered over the edge, our torch beams cutting through the misty darkness below. The ravine was about 40 feet deep, with a small stream running along its bottom, swollen with rainwater. Jenkins, Watson, descend and check for any sign of him, I ordered as they prepared their rappelling gear. I radioed the other teams with our location and the discovery. Jenkins and Watson found nothing in the ravine. No body, no blood, no signs of fall or struggle. Just smooth mud, churned by the rain and rushing water. We continued searching until dusk, when visibility became too poor to continue safely. I made the difficult call to suspend the search until morning, setting up a base camp near Blackwater Ridge. None of us said it aloud, but the mood was grim. A missing boot, but no other signs? It didn't bode well. As night fell, the rain intensified. We huddled in our tents, taking shifts to maintain radio contact with headquarters. I took the midnight to 2 a.m. watch, sitting under a tarp near our small, struggling campfire, the radio beside me. It was about 1:30 when I heard it. A voice calling from somewhere in the darkness beyond our camp. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, or perhaps the sound of water rushing through the ravine. But then it came again, clearer this time. Hello? Is anyone there? Hello? I snatched up my torch and radio, heart suddenly pounding. Possible contact. I called to the others as I shrugged into my raincoat. East of camp. 2 other rangers, Martinez and Powell, were quickly at my side, their torches piercing the rainy darkness. Hello? I called out. Park rangers. Identify yourself. Help me? Please, I'm lost. The voice sounded male, young. Could be Daniel? It seemed to be coming from the direction of the ravine. We moved cautiously, our torch beam scanning the misty forest. Keep calling out. I shouted, "We're coming to you." As we approached the ravine, the voice grew clearer, but also stranger. There was an odd quality to it now, an echo that didn't quite match the acoustics of the forest. I'm down here, in the ravine. I fell. Please hurry. We reached the edge and shone our lights down. The stream below had swollen considerably with the continued rainfall, now a rushing torrent that filled nearly half the ravine's width. I can't see anyone, Martinez muttered, sweeping his torch methodically across the ravine floor. I'm here, right here. The voice called again, but something was off. The voice seemed to be coming from directly below us, but our torch beams revealed nothing but churning water and mud. Sir, we need a visual on you. I called down. Wave or make a movement so we can locate you. I'm waving. Can't you see me? I'm right here. No one was waving. There was no one there at all. Powell gripped my arm. Chief, he whispered, his face pale in the reflected torchlight. That ravine's flooded. If anyone was down there calling out, they'd be waist deep in rushing water at least. He was right. The voice we were hearing was coming from a spot now completely submerged in the flood. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain ran down my spine. "Fall back to camp," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. Now, as we turned to go, the voice called again, but this time it was different. Desperate, angry. "Don't leave me here. I can see you. I know you can hear me." We quickened our pace, not quite running but close to it. The voice followed us, seemingly jumping from tree to tree, always just behind us, sometimes to our left, sometimes our right. "Why won't you help me? I'm dying down here." Back at camp, we roused the others. No one slept the remainder of that night. The voice continued calling, circling our camp, sometimes pleading, sometimes cursing us. By dawn, it had finally fallen silent. The rain stopped with the rising sun, and in the gray morning light, we returned to the ravine with reinforcements who arrived at first light. The flooding had receded somewhat, revealing the muddy floor. There, half buried in the mud, was a bright red backpack, Daniel's, according to the description we had, and about 10 feet away from it, partially obscured by a fallen branch, was a man's body. It took us several hours to safely retrieve him. Daniel Ashcroft had indeed fallen into the ravine, breaking his neck in the process. The medical examiner would later determine he had died instantly, 3 days before we heard that voice calling for help. 3 days before we heard a dead man begging us to save him. The official report attributes the voice to exhaustion, stress, and acoustic anomalies caused by the ravine and rainfall. A perfectly rational explanation that I've tried very hard to believe. But here's what keeps me awake on rainy nights like this. As we were zipping Daniel's body into a recovery bag, I noticed something clutched in his right hand. It took some effort to pry his stiff fingers open. It was a satellite phone, damaged, waterlogged. But when our tech team later examined it, they found something impossible. The last outgoing call attempt was logged at 1:32 a.m. on the night we heard the voice. 3 days after the medical examiner determined Daniel had died, the call never connected. There's no signal in that part of the park. But he tried, somehow, or something tried, using his phone. We never found his other boot. You know what the locals around here say about whispering pines? They say the forest sometimes keeps a piece of those who die within it. Not their body, but something else. Something that tries to lure the living deeper into the woods. I used to dismiss such tales as superstitious nonsense. Now, I'm not so sure. The rain's getting heavier now. Can you hear it? That drumming on the roof? Listen closely, because sometimes if you listen very carefully to the rainfall around Whispering Pines, you might hear something else beneath it. Something calling your name, asking for help. And if you ever find yourself in these woods during a rainstorm and hear someone calling out to you from a place where no one could possibly be, my advice is simple. Don't answer. Don't follow. And whatever you do, don't try to help it. Because I don't think it's really asking for help. I think it's offering an exchange, a trade, and I don't think you like the terms. Wait, did you hear that? Just now, beneath the rain, someone's calling my name. Rain always brings back the memories. The steady patter on my cabin roof, the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. It all takes me back to that night at Ravenwood National Park. I've worked as a forest ranger for almost 2 decades now, and I've seen my fair share of strange occurrences. But what happened on Echo Trail 5 years ago? Well, that's something I've never been able to fully explain. Are you listening to this while the rain falls outside your window? There's something oddly comforting about being indoors during a storm, isn't there? The contrast of warm safety against the wild elements. But imagine being caught in that downpour, miles from shelter, with darkness falling and something inexplicable hunting you through the trees. I was working the late shift that night, September 12th. The weather forecast had predicted light showers, but by sunset, it had developed into a proper storm, the kind that makes the ancient pines creak and groan like old men rising from their chairs. The call came in around 8:30 p.m. A woman, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, reported that her husband had returned from a day hike along Echo Trail. He'd set out early that morning, planning to complete the 12-mile loop before the rain started. An experienced hiker, she emphasized, not someone who would get lost easily. He always checks in, she kept saying, every 2 hours without fail. But I haven't heard from him since 2 p.m. I tried to reassure her that mobile reception in the park was spotty at best, especially during storms. But even as I spoke the words, something felt off. Echo Trail was indeed 12 miles, but it was well-marked and relatively easy terrain. Even in poor weather, an experienced hiker should have completed it by nightfall. Protocol dictated waiting until morning to begin a search. But with a worsening storm and dropping temperatures, hypothermia was a real concern. I radioed my colleague Meredith, who was patrolling the northern sector, and we agreed to do an initial sweep of the trail. The rain was coming down in sheets by the time I reached the eastern trailhead. I sat in my Ranger vehicle for a moment, watching the windscreen wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. My torch beam would be severely limited in these conditions. It was going to be a difficult search. Have you ever noticed how rain transforms a familiar landscape? The steady drumming on leaves creates a white noise that masks other sounds. Visibility drops to mere feet. The world shrinks around you, and what was once familiar becomes alien. I pulled my hood tight, switched on my torch, and stepped out into the deluge. Hello. I called out every 50 yards or so. Park ranger. Anyone there? My voice sounded muffled, swallowed by the rain and darkness. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when my radio crackled. Ranger Harper? It's Meredith. I'm at the western trailhead. Starting my sweep now. Copy that. I replied. I'm about a mile in from the east. No sign of our missing hiker yet. This rain is biblical, Meredith commented. Poor bloke. Probably took shelter somewhere. Keep your eyes peeled for trail shelters. There were 3 basic wooden shelters spaced along Echo Trail. Simple 3-walled structures with a roof designed to provide temporary respite during bad weather. Finding our missing hiker huddled in one of them was our best-case scenario. The first shelter was empty, not even footprints in the muddy ground around it. I continued on, the rain somehow intensifying, drumming against my waterproof jacket like impatient fingers. The path began to climb, becoming rockier and more treacherous. The tree cover thickened, ancient pines and oaks creating a canopy that offered minimal protection from the rain. My torch beam reflected off the wet surfaces, creating eerie, dancing shadows among the trees. That's when I first heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A metallic clinking, like someone tapping a spoon against glass. I stopped, straining to hear over the rainfall. There was again. Clink, clink, clink. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Hello. I called out louder now. Park ranger. If you can hear me, respond. The clinking stopped immediately. Complete silence apart from the rain. I radioed Meredith. I might have something. Strange noise about 2 miles in from the eastern trailhead. just past the first shelter. Any luck on your end?" "Negative," she replied, her voice breaking up slightly through the static. "Haven't even reached the first shelter from my side yet." "What kind of noise?" "Metallic clinking. Could be gear from our missing hiker." "Roger that. I'll pick up my pace." I continued forward, more cautiously now, sweeping my torch in wider arcs. The path here ran along a ridge, with a steep drop to my right descending into a ravine. In daylight, it offered spectacular views. Tonight, it was just a yawning void of darkness. The clinking sound came again, closer this time, somewhere off to my left, away from the trail. Against my better judgment, I stepped off the path, pushing through wet undergrowth. My boots sank ankle-deep into the sodden earth. "Hello? Anyone there? I'm here to help." My torch beam caught something reflective about 20 yards ahead. A quick flash, then gone. I moved toward it, using tree trunks as support on the increasingly slippery ground. What I found was a hiking pole, upright in the mud, as if someone had just been using it moments before and had simply let go. Attached to the handle was a small metal carabiner that clinked softly against the pole when the wind blew. I picked it up, examining it under my torchlight. It was a high-quality pole, the kind serious hikers invest in. Around it, I could make out a single set of boot prints, heading deeper into the forest, away from the trail. This didn't make sense. Why would an experienced hiker leave the clearly marked trail? And why abandon a perfectly good hiking pole? I radioed Meredith again. Found a hiking pole about 50 yards off trail. Looks recent. I'm going to follow the tracks and see where they lead. "Be careful," Meredith warned. "It's easy to get turned around out there. I'm still about 30 minutes from your position." The rain against the windows of this old tower sounds different than it does anywhere else. Harder, more insistent, almost as if it's trying to get in. I've worked as a ranger at Shadow Cliff National Park for nearly 12 years now, and I've spent countless nights alone in this Firewatch tower during storm season. But none of those nights compare to what happened here last August. Do you ever get that feeling that you're being watched? Not just the casual paranoia we all experience occasionally, but a deep, primal certainty that eyes are fixed upon you? That's how it all began. The summer had been unusually hot and dry, turning the vast expanse of Shadow Cliff into a tinderbox. Fire risk was at its highest level, which meant we had rangers stationed in all 4 watchtowers around the clock. I was assigned to the North Tower, the oldest and most remote of them all, perched atop Raven Peak. It offers a 360-degree view of the northern quadrant of the park. When visibility is good, that is, that particular evening, a storm front was moving in from the west. Dark clouds had been gathering all afternoon, promising a welcome respite from the heat, but creating new challenges for us rangers. Lightning strikes in such dry conditions could easily ignite the parched vegetation below. I'd been on duty since 6 a.m., and my replacement wasn't due until the following morning. As darkness fell and the first distant rumbles of thunder echoed across the valleys, I made my final radio check in the evening. North Tower to base, daily report complete. All sectors clear. Storm approaching from west. Over. Copy that, North Tower, came the crackling reply from Harper, our night dispatcher. Weather Service is predicting heavy rainfall throughout the night. Should help with our fire risk. Get some rest, McAllister. Over. Will do. North Tower out. I switched the radio to the overnight emergency channel and began preparing for a quiet evening. The tower is Spartan, just a small room atop a 70-foot steel framework, a narrow bunk built into one wall, a desk with monitoring equipment, a small kitchenette, and a tiny bathroom cubicle. Not luxurious, but sufficient. The first drops of rain began to strike the windows as I heated a tin of soup on the camping stove. The sound was actually soothing at first, a gentle patter that gradually intensified into a steady drumming. By the time I'd finished my meal, the tower was being lashed by sheets of water, visibility reduced to almost nothing. The world beyond the glass had disappeared into darkness and torrential rain. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the forest below in stark relief. I counted seconds until thunder. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it came, a deafening crack that seemed to shake the entire tower. The storm was close. I settled onto my bunk with a paperback, listening to the rain and occasional rumbles of thunder. Despite the intensity of the storm, it was peaceful up there. Isolated, yes, but peaceful, until the radio crackled to life at precisely 11:42 p.m. It startled me, the sudden burst of static in the quiet tower. I put down my book and moved to the desk, puzzled. Emergency communications were rare, especially at this hour. ELP position, North Tower sector. The voice was broken, barely audible through the static. Male, I thought, though it was hard to tell. I picked up the handset. This is North Tower receiving. Your transmission is breaking up. Please identify yourself and repeat your message. Over. More static than hiker lost coordinates, please. This is Ranger McAllister at North Tower. If you can hear me, I need your name and location. Are you in distress? Over. The static cleared momentarily, and the voice came through with sudden, startling clarity. I see your light. I'm coming to you. My blood ran cold. The tower was 70 feet up. In this weather, in this darkness, no one should be able to see any light from my position, except I glanced at the monitoring console. The external floodlight indicator was on. That was impossible. I hadn't activated it. The switch was right there in the off position. I moved to the windows, peering out into the storm. The floodlights mounted on the exterior of the tower were indeed on, casting weak cones of light into the rain-drenched darkness below. But I couldn't see anyone in their glow. Based in North Tower, do you copy? Over. The radio crackled again, this time with Harper's familiar voice. I snatched up the handset. North Tower here. Harper, did you just receive a distress call from my sector? Over. A pause, and negative North Tower. No distress calls logged tonight. Is there a situation? Over. I hesitated. I just received the transmission. Someone claiming to be a lost hiker in my sector said they could see my tower light and were heading toward me. Over. That's strange, Harper replied. Nothing's come through the main channels. Could be someone with a private radio operating on our emergency frequency. Keep me posted if they make contact again. Over. Copy that. Also, Harper, the external flood are on, but I didn't activate them. Could there be an electrical issue with the storm? Over. Another pause, longer this time. The remote monitoring system shows all North Tower exterior lights as inactive. McAllister. Are you certain they're on? Over. I looked out the window again. The floodlights were definitely on, casting their pale glow into the rain. Affirmative. I'm looking at them right now. Over. Must be a glitch in the monitoring system, Harper said, though she sounded uncertain. Make a note in your log, and we'll have maintenance check it when they do their rounds next week. Over. Copy that. North Tower out. I put down the handset, a sense of unease settling over me. Moving back to the windows, I scanned the darkness below. The rain was coming down in sheets, visibility limited to just a few yards beyond the floodlights' reach. If someone really was out there trying to reach the tower in this weather, that's when I saw it. A figure, just at the edge of the light's reach. A dark silhouette, standing perfectly still, face upturned toward the tower. My heart lurched. Someone really was out there. A lost hiker, just as the voice on the radio had claimed. The rain against the windows of this old tower sounds different than it does anywhere else. Harder, more insistent, almost as if it's trying to get in. I've worked as a ranger at Shadow Cliff National Park for nearly 12 years now, and I've spent countless nights alone in this fire watch tower during storm season. But none of those nights compare to what happened here last August. Do you ever get that feeling that you're being watched? Not just the casual paranoia we all experience occasionally, but a deep, primal certainty that eyes are fixed upon you? That's how it all began. The summer had been unusually hot and dry, turning the vast expanse of Shadow Cliff into a tinderbox. Fire risk was at its highest level, which meant we had rangers stationed in all 4 watchtowers around the clock. I was assigned to North Tower, the oldest and most remote of them all, perched atop Raven Peak. It offers a 360-degree view of the northern quadrant of the park. When visibility is good, that is, that particular evening, a storm front was moving in from the west. Dark clouds had been gathering all afternoon, promising a welcome respite from the heat, but creating new challenges for us rangers. Lightning strikes in such dry conditions could easily ignite the parched vegetation below. I'd been on duty since 6 a.m., and my replacement wasn't due until the following morning. As darkness fell and first distant rumbles of thunder echoed across the valleys, I made my final radio check in the evening. North Tower to base, daily report complete. All sectors clear. Storm approaching from west. Over. Copy that, North Tower, came the crackling reply from Harper, our night dispatcher. Weather Service is predicting heavy rainfall throughout the night. Should help with our fire risk. Get some rest, McAllister. Over. Will do. North Tower out. I switched the radio to the overnight emergency channel and began preparing for a quiet evening. The tower is Spartan, just a small room atop a 70-foot steel framework. A narrow bunk built into one wall, a desk with monitoring equipment, a small kitchenette, and a tiny bathroom cubicle. Not luxurious, but sufficient. The first drops of rain began to strike the windows as I heated a tin of soup on the camping stove. The sound was actually soothing at first, a gentle patter that gradually intensified into a steady drumming. By the time I'd finished my meal, the tower was being lashed by sheets of water, visibility reduced to almost nothing. The world beyond the glass had disappeared into darkness and torrential rain. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the forest below in stark relief. I counted seconds until thunder. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it came, a deafening crack that seemed to shake the entire tower. The storm was close. I settled onto my bunk with a paperback, listening to the rain and occasional rumbles of thunder. Despite the intensity of the storm, it was peaceful up there. Isolated, yes, but peaceful, until the radio crackled to life at precisely 11:42 p.m. It startled me, the sudden burst of static in the quiet tower. I put down my book and moved to the desk, puzzled. Emergency communications were rare, especially at this hour. Elk, position, North Tower sector. The voice was broken, barely audible through the static. Male, I thought, though it was hard to tell. I picked up the handset. This is North Tower receiving. Your transmission is breaking up. Please identify yourself and repeat your message. Over. More static than, hiker lost coordinates, please. This is Ranger McAllister at North Tower. If you can hear me, I need your name and location. Are you in distress? Over. The static cleared momentarily, and the voice came through with sudden, startling clarity. I see your light. I'm coming to you. My blood ran cold. The tower was 70 feet up. In this weather, in this darkness, no one should be able to see any light from my position, except I glanced at the monitoring console. The external floodlight indicator was on. That was impossible. I hadn't activated it. The switch was right there in the off position. I moved to the windows, peering out into the storm. The floodlights mounted on the exterior of the tower were indeed on, casting weak cones of light into the rain-drenched darkness below. But I couldn't see anyone in their glow. Based in North Tower, do you copy? Over. The radio crackled again, this time with Harper's familiar voice. I snatched up the handset. North Tower here. Harper, did you just receive a distress call from my sector? Over. A pause, and negative North Tower. No distress calls logged tonight. Is there a situation? Over. I hesitated. I just received a transmission. Someone claiming to be a lost hiker in my sector said they could see my tower light and were heading toward me. Over. That's strange, Harper replied. Nothing's come through the main channels. Could be someone with a private radio operating on our emergency frequency. Keep me posted if they make contact again. Over. Copy that. Also, Harper, the external flood are on, but I didn't activate them. Could there be an electrical issue with the storm? Over. Another pause, longer this time. The remote monitoring system shows all North Tower exterior lights as inactive. McAllister. Are you certain they're on? Over. I looked out the window again. The floodlights were definitely on, casting their pale glow into the rain. Affirmative. I'm looking at them right now. Over. Must be a glitch in the monitoring system, Harper said, though she sounded uncertain. Make a note in your log, and we'll have maintenance check it when they do their rounds next week. Over. Copy that. North Tower out. I put down the handset, a sense of unease settling over me. Moving back to the windows, I scanned the darkness below. The rain was coming down in sheets, visibility limited to just a few yards beyond the floodlight's reach. If someone really was out there trying to reach the tower in this weather, that's when I saw it. A figure just at the edge of the light's reach. A dark silhouette standing perfectly still, face upturned toward the tower. My heart lurched. Someone really was out there. A lost hiker, just as the voice on the radio had claimed. I grabbed my raincoat and torch, prepared to head down and guide them to safety, when something stopped me, a sudden, inexplicable dread that rooted me to the spot. The figure wasn't moving, despite the driving rain, the near-freezing temperatures. They stood perfectly motionless, staring up at my tower. No one behaves like that. No one. I raised my binoculars, trying to get a better look through the rain-streaked windows. The magnification wasn't great in these conditions, but I could make out a human form. Mayo, I thought, wearing dark clothing. His face was indistinct, a pale oval tilted upward. As I watched, he raised one arm slowly and pointed directly at me. The radio burst into static again, making me jump. I see you watching me, Ranger McAllister. It was the same voice as before, but different somehow. Clearer. Colder. How do you know my name? I stammered into the handset. I know all about you, Sarah McAllister, the voice replied. I've been watching you for days now. You live alone. No family. No one to miss you right away if something were to happen. Ice seemed to flood my veins. I moved away from the window. Who is this? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. This channel is for emergency communications only. Oh, this is definitely an emergency, the voice replied, a horrible amusement in its tone. For you, anyway. I'm contacting base now, I said, reaching for the main radio. They won't hear you, the voice said calmly. Check your signal. I glanced at the main radio. The signal indicator was dead. No connection. That's not possible, I muttered, more to myself than to voice on an emergency channel. Many things are possible on nights like this, the voice replied. Nights when the barrier between worlds thins. Did you know 7 people have died in this tower over the years? Ranger McAllister? Lightning strikes. Accidents. 1 suicide. And 1... Well, they never did determine what happened to Ranger Phillips back in '83. He simply vanished during a storm much like this one. My mouth went dry. What do you want? To come inside, the voice said simply, It's cold out here in the rain. Won't you invite me in? I looked back at the window. The figure was closer now, standing at the base of the tower, directly beneath the exterior staircase that spiraled up to my position. No, I said firmly. Identify yourself properly or leave the area immediately. This is a restricted government facility. The radio emitted a sound that might have been a laugh, but was somehow wrong. Too hollow, too resonant. Very well, the voice said. If you won't invite me in, I'll have to invite myself. A metallic clang echoed up from below. The sound of the security gate at the base of the stairs being opened, followed by footsteps, slow and deliberate, on the metal stairs. Someone was coming up. I lunged to the door, checking that it was locked. It was the heavy deadbolt firmly in place. I retreated to the far side of the room, grabbing my flashlight. It was also a heavy mag light, the kind that could double as a bludgeon if necessary. The footsteps continued their steady ascent. Clang, 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 rhythmic, unhurried, drawing inexorably closer. Base! Base, come in. This is North Tower with an emergency. I shouted into the main radio, but only static answered me. The footsteps reached the small landing outside my door. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of the rain. Then a soft knock. 3 gentle taps on the metal door. Ranger McAllister. The voice called, no longer come to the radio, but directly through the door. Won't you let me in? It's awfully wet out here. Go away, I shouted, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. I'm armed and I called for backup. No, you haven't, the voice replied, sounding almost sorrowful now. No one can hear you. No one is coming to help. It's just you and me, Sarah. It's always been just you and me. Another knock, firmer this time. Who are you? I demanded, my voice breaking. Don't you recognize me? The voice asked. Look out your window. Really look. Against my better judgment, I edged toward the window that faced the landing. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could make out a figure standing there, a man in a park ranger uniform. His face, now visible in the light from the tower windows, was familiar, hauntingly familiar. It was my face. Not exactly. There was something wrong about it, something off in proportions, as if someone had tried to create a mask of my features but hadn't gotten it quite right. but unmistakably, terrifyingly, it wore my face. I stumbled backward with a choked cry, crashing into the desk. "What's wrong, Sarah?" My voice asked from outside the door. "Don't you want to meet yourself? Don't you want to be complete?" The door handle jiggled, then with more force began to rattle violently. The others didn't understand either. The thing outside said, its voice changing, becoming less like mine, more like many voices speaking in unison. But they do now. They're all part of me, part of us, just like you will be. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. I scrambled for the emergency phone. A landline meant for use if the radios failed. Dead. No dial tone. Another impact against the door. The frame splintered slightly. In desperation, I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit, loaded it with trembling hands, and aimed it at the door. A third impact, and the deadbolt tore partially free from the frame. "Please," I begged, though I don't know who I was addressing. "Please help me." As if an answer, lightning struck with a blinding flash, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The tower lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. In the momentary illumination from the lightning, I saw the door burst open. I fired the flare gun. The blazing red flare illuminated the thing that stood in the doorway. I saw it clearly for a split second. Not human, never human. Despite the range of uniform it wore, despite the approximation of my face stretched across its features, the flare struck it directly in the chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if the flare had triggered a chemical reaction, the thing's form began to dissolve, melt, change. It screamed, a sound no human throat could produce. High and piercing one moment, impossibly deep the next, like multiple voices cry out in agony. Lightning struck again, this time hitting the tower itself. The entire structure shook. Sparks erupted from the electrical outlets. The air filled with the acrid scent of ozone and burning wires. And then darkness. Silence, but for the rain. I don't know how long I crouched there in the dark, clutching the empty flare gun, expecting at any moment to feel cold hands upon me. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to have lost all meaning. Eventually, I became aware of a voice, distant at first, then growing clearer. "Tower, come in." "North Tower, do you copy?" "Sarah, are you there?" "Over." The radio, working again. I crawled to the desk, every muscle aching, and grabbed the handset. "North Tower here." I croaked. "Thank God." Harper's voice came through, relief evident. "We lost contact with you when lightning struck near your position. Are you all right?" "Over." I looked toward the doorway. In the dim light of the emergency backup lamp that had finally flickered on, I could see the door, intact, closed, deadbolt firmly in place. No sign of damage. No sign it had ever been forced open. But on the floor, just inside the door, was a puddle of water. And in that puddle lay a park ranger badge. My spare badge, which should have been in the drawer of my desk. "McAllister, are you there? Do you need assistance?" "Over." I swallowed hard. I'm fine." Tower took a lightning strike. Momentary power loss. All systems returning to normal now. "Over." "Copy that. You had us worried. Check in hourly until your relief arrives. Okay?" "Over." "Copy. North Tower out." I put down the handset and stared at the badge on the floor. Slowly, I approached it, half expecting it to move, to change, to become something else. But it was just a badge, cold metal catching the dim light. I picked it up. It was soaking wet, as if it had been left out in the rain. The rest of that night passed with excruciating slowness. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, just sat with my back against the wall, facing the door, waiting for dawn. When my replacement arrived the next morning, he commented that I looked terrible. I brushed it off as a rough night during the storm. I didn't tell him about the voice on the radio, or the thing with my face, or the badge found on the floor of the tower. Who would believe me? The official record shows that North Tower was struck by lightning at 11:53 p.m., causing a temporary communications blackout. Nothing more. But here's the thing that keeps me awake on nights like this, when the rain drums against the windows of the same tower. Yes, I requested to be reassigned here. I need to know. You see, need to be sure the surveillance cameras at the base of the tower were still functioning during that communications blackout. I checked the footage a week later, when I couldn't stand the not knowing anymore. There's a 3-minute gap from 11:53 p.m. exactly, when the lightning struck, to 11:56 p.m. Before and after the gap, the tower stairs are empty, just rain and darkness. But the external floodlights, which I swear were on that night, the system logs show they remained off all night. And the badge, my spare badge that I found on the floor, according to the inventory system, it was never issued to me. I only ever had one badge, the one I was wearing that night. So you see why I requested this post again. Why I sit here on stormy nights, watching the darkness, listening to the rain, waiting, because I think it's still out there, learning, adapting. And I think one day, during a storm just like this one, I'll hear that familiar voice on the radio again. Only this time, it might not be wearing my face when it comes. It might be wearing yours. Listen, can you hear that? Under the sound of the rain? That faint metallic clanging? Like footsteps on a spiral staircase. Coming up, the rain's been falling for hours now. I can hear it tapping against the roof of my cabin. A gentle, persistent rhythm that most people would find soothing. I used to find it soothing too once. Now it just brings back memories. Are you comfortable where you're sitting? Warm? Safe? Perhaps with a cup of tea or something stronger? Good. Hold on to that feeling. Remember that you're not out there in the darkness, in the rain. Not like I was, not like she was. I've been a ranger at Blackwater Ridge National Park for 22 years. It's beautiful country. Ancient forests, mist-shrouded mountains, valleys so deep the sun only reaches their floors for a few hours each day. The kind of wilderness that reminds you how small humans really are, how fragile. Most of what we do is routine. Guide tourists, maintain trails, monitor wildlife. Occasionally we search for hikers who've wandered off path. Usually we find them cold, frightened, but alive. Usually. For years ago, we had a particularly wet autumn. Weeks of near-constant drizzle punctuated by violent thunderstorms that brought down trees and turned gentle streams into raging torrents. The kind of weather that keeps sensible people indoors. Emily Chin wasn't sensible, apparently. The call came in on a Tuesday evening. I was working the night shift at the main ranger station. The rain hammering against the windows like it wanted to get in. The woman on the phone was frantic, her words tumbling over each other. My sister, she kept saying, my sister hasn't come home. She went hiking your park 3 days ago, and she hasn't come home. I tried to calm her, asked the usual questions. Name? Emily Chun. Age? 32. Description? Petite Asian woman. Approximately 5 feet 4 inches. Black hair, usually worn in a ponytail. Experienced hiker? Yes, very. Had she registered her height? No. That last bit wasn't unusual. Many regular hikers, especially locals, don't bother registering for day trips. But according to her sister, Emily had planned to be out for 2 nights, camping deep in the northern section of the park. That area, we call the Hollows, is challenging terrain even in good weather. In the current conditions, it was treacherous. When did you last hear from her? I asked. Sunday morning. She texted to say she was starting her hike. Said she'd be back Tuesday afternoon. She's never late. Never. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 10 p.m. She could have been delayed by the weather, I suggested. But even as I said it, I felt uneasy. Experienced hikers know to build weather delays into their plans, and they know to stay put if conditions turn dangerous. She would have called, the sister insisted. We have this rule. Check in, even if it's just to say you'll be late. Always, after our parents. She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. I understood family rules born from tragedy. I promised we'd begin searching at first light, asked her to email photographs and any information about Emily's planned route. Standard procedure. But as I hung up, something made me check the weather forecast again. Heavy rain for the next 36 hours, followed by a brief window of clear weather, then more storms rolling in. If Emily was lost or injured in the Hollows, waiting even 12 hours could mean the difference between finding her alive or... I made a decision. Technically, I shouldn't have. Protocol dictates waiting until morning for searches except in cases involving children or known injuries. But something about this one got under my skin. The sister's certainty that something was wrong. The relentless rain. The fact that the Hollows had claimed hikers before. I radioed my colleague Marcus, who was patrolling the southern perimeter. I'm heading out to the Hollows to look for a missing hiker. I told him, can you handle the station for a few hours? In this weather? You serious, James? His concern was evident even through the static. Wait till morning. Get a proper team together. Weather's only getting worse. If she's injured out there, a pause, and at least take Davidson with you. Ranger Davidson was off duty, but lived close to the northern trailhead. I hesitated, then agreed. 2 searchers were always better than 1, especially in hazardous conditions. By the time I'd gathered my gear, notified dispatch of my plans, and driven to the northern entrance, the rain had intensified from merely heavy to biblical. My wipers could barely keep up, the headlights of my service vehicle cutting yellow tunnels through sheets of water. The world beyond was black and formless. Davidson was waiting in her truck at the trailhead parking lot, looking none too pleased about being called out. This better be good, she said by way of greeting, pulling her rain gear tighter. I briefed her on the situation as we checked our equipment. Torches, radios, first aid kits, emergency blankets. We synchronized our watches just past midnight and agreed to search for 3 hours before reassessing. Her sister sent a photo. I said, showing Davidson my phone. The image showed a smiling young woman standing on a mountaintop, arms spread wide, the world laid out behind her. She might have been heading for Summit Point. Davidson nodded. Summit Point was popular with experienced hikers, challenging enough to be satisfying, with views worth the effort. But reaching it required passing through the narrow valleys and dense forests of the Hollows. I'll take the eastern trail. You take the western, she said. Radio check every 20 minutes. If either of us doesn't respond, the other heads back immediately and calls for backup. Got it? I nodded, appreciating her caution. The Hollows had earned their ominous reputation honestly. We set off, the rain enveloping us in our separate cocoons of limited visibility and growing discomfort. My torch beam seemed feeble against the darkness, barely illuminating a few yards of muddy trail ahead. The rain hissed among the leaves, drummed against my hood, ran in rivulets down my waterproofs and into my boots despite my best efforts. Emily, I called every 100 yards or so. Emily Chun, park ranger, Can you hear me? My voice sounded muffled, swallowed by the rain and the densely packed trees. It felt futile, but I persisted. You never know when a call might reach someone just at the edge of earshot. The first radio check with Davidson came and went. Nothing to report on either side. The second too. By the third, I'd reached the point where the Western Trail began its ascent towards Summit Point, leaving the tangled paths of the hollows behind. If Emily had been heading for the summit, she would have passed this way. I swept my torch across the ground, looking for any sign of recent passage. The mud showed boot prints, but the rain had blurred them, making it impossible to determine their age. Emily, I called again, louder this time. Nothing but the rain. I was about to move on when my torch caught something reflective just off the trail. A few steps brought me to a small clearing where a tent had been pitched, a good quality one, designed for harsh weather. It had been secured properly, with additional guidelines anchoring it against the wind. This had to be Emily's camp. I approached cautiously, calling out again. No response. The tent flap was zipped closed but not locked. I announced myself once more, then carefully opened it, shining my torch inside. Empty. A sleeping bag lay neatly rolled at one end. A backpack sat beside it, apparently untouched. A book lay open, face down, as if the reader had stepped away momentarily, intending to return. I keyed my radio. Davidson, it's Harper. I found what I believed to be Emily Chen's campsite, approximately half a mile from the Summit Point Junction. Tent is empty but intact. No signs of distress. Over. Copy that. Davidson's voice crackled back. Any indication of where she might have gone? Over. I examined the tent more closely. Negative. Looks like she stepped away, leaving everything behind. I'm going to check the surrounding area. Over. Be careful. I'm heading your way. ETA 20 minutes. Over. Copy. Harper out. I did a methodical sweep outward from the tent, calling Emily's name every few seconds. The rain had obliterated any footprints. But about 30 yards west of the camp, I found a narrow trail I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't on my map, probably a game trail, or perhaps an unofficial path worn by hikers seeking a shortcut. Standard search procedure is to stick to marked trails until a comprehensive team can be assembled. But if Emily had gone this way and become lost or injured, I decided to follow it just for a short distance. The path wound deeper into the forest, narrowing as the undergrowth pressed in. The trees here were old, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that would have been near impenetrable to sunlight even in daytime. In the darkness of the storm, with only my torch for illumination, it was like entering another world. The rain seemed different here, heavier, colder. Or maybe that was just my imagination, fueled by growing unease. I called Emily's name again, my voice sounding small and insignificant against the vastness of the ancient forest. The path ended abruptly at a small clearing, and there, in the center of that clearing, was a single hiking boot, just one boot, standing upright as if someone had been wearing it moments before and simply vanished. It was a woman's boot, size 6 or 7, caked with fresh mud. I approached it slowly, playing my torch around the clearing, expecting what? Blood? Signs of a struggle? There was nothing, just a single boot in the mud, and all around it, utterly trackless ground, as if the rain had washed away all evidence of how it got there. My radio crackled. Harper, it's Davidson. I'm at the tent. Where are you? Over. I raised the radio to respond, but before I could speak, I heard something, a voice, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere deep in the forest, beyond the clearing. Hello? Is someone there? A woman's voice, young, frightened. Emily? I called, lowering the radio. Emily Chen? This is Park Ranger Harper. Please help me. The voice came again, clearer now. I'm lost. I can't find my way back. I raise the radio. Davidson. I can hear what sounds like our missing hiker. Approximately 100 yards west of the tent, following an unmarked trail. I'm proceeding toward the voice. Over. Static answered me. The storm must have been interfering with the signal. I tried once more. Davidson, do you copy? Nothing but static. Protocol said I should return to a point where I could establish contact. Every ranger knows the dangers of losing communication in the field. But that voice, so clearly frightened, so clearly in need of help, I'm coming. I called out, keep talking so I can find you. Please hurry. The voice responded, I'm so cold. I moved past the clearing, deeper into the unmarked forest. There was no trail here, just dense undergrowth and closely packed trees. I had to force my way through in places. The branches claw at my raincoat, the mud sucking at my boots. Where are you? I called. Here. I'm here. The voice seemed to move, sometimes sounding closer, sometimes further away. It led me onward, deeper into the woods than I had intended to go. But each time I considered turning back, it would come again, so plaintive, so desperate that I couldn't bring myself to abandon the search. It was only after I'd been walking for what felt like 20 minutes that I realized something was wrong. Very wrong. The voice hadn't said anything specific, hadn't identified itself, had only begged for help, had only kept me moving forward, and it had never once responded directly to anything I said. I stopped abruptly, cold dread seeping into my veins that had nothing to do with the relentless rain. Who are you? I demanded, my voice sharper now. Identify yourself. Please help me. The voice came again, unchanged in its tone and cadence. I'm lost. I can't find my way back. Exactly the same words. Exactly the same inflection. Like a recording being played over and over. I turned, intending to retrace my steps, only to realize with growing horror that I had no idea which direction I'd come from. The forest looked identical in every direction. Dark, dense, primal. My torch beam seemed weaker now, barely penetrating the curtain of rain and mist that surrounded me. I reached for my compass. It was spinning erratically, the needle whirling as if being affected by some powerful magnetic force. Please hurry. The voice called again, closer now. I'm so cold. I backed away from the sound, heart hammering in my chest. My radio burst into static, so loud it made me jump. Through the white noise, I could just make out fragments of Davidson's voice. Harper, where are you? The trail don't. Then clearer, urgently. It's not her. Whatever you're hearing, it's not her. We found. The rest was lost in static. Davidson? I shouted into the radio. Davidson, repeat. What did you find? But the static had returned, a wall of white noise that obliterated any chance of communication. And behind me, impossibly close now, I'm here. I'm here. I spun around, torch beam cutting wildly through the darkness, and caught a glimpse of something that stopped my breath. A figure, standing between two ancient trees. Female in form, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. Its proportions subtly but unmistakably inhuman. And its face, in the split second my torch illuminated it, I saw that where a face should be was only a blank expanse of pale skin, featureless except for what looked like a vertical tear where a mouth should be. I ran. Blind panic took over. I crashed through the undergrowth, slipping in mud, branches whipping at my face. Behind me, that voice called again and again, each time closer, each time more distorted, as if whatever was producing it was forgetting how to mimic human speech. I'm here. I'm Achiuri. The last word stretched into something that wasn't language at all. A high, keening wail that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I don't know how long I ran, or in what direction. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that primal forest. But eventually, miraculously, I burst out onto a recognizable trail. The main path, the one I should have stayed on. And there was Davidson, torch in hand, looking simultaneously relieved and horrified to see me. "Harper, Jesus Christ, what happened to you? You're bleeding." I raised a hand to my face, felt warm wetness mixed with the cold rain. Must have been cut by branches in my headlong flight. "There's something in there," I gasped, pointing back the way I come. Something, it was using a voice, trying to lure me deeper. Davidson gripped my arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." They found Emily Chin 2 hours ago. The world seemed to tilt around me. "What?" "Where?" "On the Eastern Trail. She fell into a ravine Sunday afternoon, broke her leg. Another hiking party found her and managed to get her to the ranger station on the east side of the park." But I heard." "Whatever you heard, it wasn't her," Davidson said grimly. "The Eastern team radioed it, and just after we split up. I've been trying to reach you for over an hour." As we hurried back toward the trailhead, Davidson explained that after failing to reach me by radio, she'd called in backup. They were assembling a search team for me when I'd emerged from the forest. "What about the tent?" I asked. "The campsite I found." Davidson gave me an odd look. "What tent, Harper?" "There was no tent where you said. Just that old fire circle near the junction. But I'd seen it, touched it, opened it and looked inside. The official report states that I became disoriented in the severe weather conditions and wandered off trail. That the combination of exhaustion, poor visibility, and hypothermia led to auditory hallucinations. Not uncommon in such situations. A reasonable, rational explanation that I've tried very hard to believe over the years. But here's what I know for certain. Emily Chung was indeed found alive with a broken leg on the eastern side of the park. She had never camped in the hollows, had never even been on the Western Trail. And yet, I found a campsite. I found a booth. I heard a voice. The Forest Service conducted a thorough sweep of the area where I claimed to have had my experience. They found nothing. No unofficial trail. No clearing. No boot. But 3 more hikers have gone missing in that section of the park since then. All during rainstorms. None ever found. And sometimes on nights like this, when the rain drums against my roof, I think I can hear something underneath it. A voice calling from far away. I'm here, waiting for someone to follow. So if you're ever hiking in Blackwater Ridge during a rainstorm, and you hear someone calling for help deep among the trees, trust me when I say this. It's not human. It never was. And it's still hungry. The rain's picking up now. Listen carefully. Can you hear it? That's not just raindrops anymore, is it? The rain against my window tonight reminds me of that night 5 years ago. Have you ever noticed how rain creates its own kind of silence? It drowns out the small sounds. The creaking of a house settling, the rustle of leaves outside, the distant call of night birds. It creates a cocoon of white noise that makes you feel utterly alone in the world. I've been a forest ranger at Evergreen Ridge National Park for almost 16 years now. The locals call it the Ridge. 60,000 acres of pristine wilderness, dense pine forests, crystal clear lakes, mountains that scrape the sky. Beautiful, serene, until it isn't. I wasn't always stationed at the main ranger cabin. When I first started, I spent 3 years at Outpost 17, a remote cabin deep in the northern sector. It's the most isolated posting in the park. 15 miles from the nearest road, no cell service, just a satellite phone for emergencies and a radio that works when the weather permits. The cabin itself is basic. 2 rooms, a wood stove, solar panels for minimal electricity. Most rangers request a transfer after 6 months. I stayed for 3 years. I like solitude, or I did. That particular October had been unseasonably wet. 3 weeks of constant drizzle had turned to proper storms by month's end. The kind that bend trees double and send branches crashing down. Most of the seasonal trails have been closed. Tourists sent home. The park operating with a skeleton crew until weather conditions improved. I was midway through my evening radio check-in with headquarters when the transmission cut out. Not unusual during storms. The mountains play havoc with radio signals. I tried again. Nothing but static. I noted the time, 8:47 p.m., and prepared for a quiet, disconnected night. Protocol dictated trying again in an hour, then switching to the satellite phone if communications couldn't be established. The rain intensified as night deepened, drumming on the cabin's metal roof like impatient fingers. I stoked the fire in the wood stove, made tea, and settled in with a dog-eared paperback. The satellite phone sat silent on its charging base. The wind howled around the eaves. At precisely 10:13 p.m., someone knocked on my door. 3 sharp raps, distinct and deliberate. I froze, teacup halfway to my lips. No one should have been out there. Not in this weather. Not at this hour. Not this far from any trail or road. Hello? I called, setting down my cup and moving toward the door. Park ranger. Who's there? No answer. Just the rain. I reached for my torch and sidearm, precaution against the occasional 4-legged visitor, and opened the door a crack. The beam of my torch cut through sheets of rain, illuminating nothing but the small clearing around my cabin and the wall of dark pines beyond. No vehicle, no person, nothing. Must have been a branch falling against the cabin. I reasoned, or perhaps debris blown by the wind. I was about to close the door when I noticed something on the ground just beyond the small covered porch. Footprints, human footprints in the mud, leading up to my door, and then continuing around the side of the cabin, fresh enough that they hadn't yet filled with rainwater. Every instinct screamed danger. I should have closed the door, locked it, and reached for the satellite phone. Instead, I stepped onto the porch, torch beam following those footprints as they disappeared around the corner. This is Park Ranger Cooper. I called, my voice nearly lost in the storm. Identify yourself. The wind answered, carrying with it a sound that might have been a voice, or might have been the creaking of wind-stressed branches. I couldn't tell. I stepped back inside, secured the door, and reached for the satellite phone. Dead. The display showed no signal, which was impossible. The system was designed to work in all weather conditions. I checked the power. The charging indicator light was on, but the battery icon showed empty. Another knock came, from the back door this time. 3 sharp raps, identical to the first set. Who's there? I demanded, moving toward the rear of the cabin, torch in one hand, pistol in the other. Again, no answer. The back door had a small window set into its upper half. I raised my torch, shining it through glass. Nothing, just rain and darkness. As I watched, a thick fog began to coalesce in the beam of my torch. It seemed to gather itself, swirling faster, becoming more opaque, until it formed what appeared to be impossibly the silhouette of a person, standing just beyond the door. I stumbled backward, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin despite the warmth of the cabin. What I was seeing couldn't be real. Fog doesn't behave that way. Doesn't form human shapes out of nothing. The silhouette raised what might have been an arm, pointing directly at me through the glass. 3 more knocks, though the figure didn't appear to move. I raised my pistol, back away from the door. Now, my voice sounded thin, frightened even to my own ears. The figure remained motionless for a long moment. Then it began to change. The human shape elongated, stretched, became something else. Something with too many angles, too many limbs, a form that seemed to fold on itself in ways that hurt my eyes to look at. And then it was gone, dissipating like smoke in the wind. I stood frozen, staring at the empty space where it had been, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. A trick of light and shadow, perhaps, or the beginning of a fever. I'd been feeling run down all week. I tried the satellite phone again. Still dead. The radio produced nothing but static. I checked both doors, securely locked. Then the windows, all 6 of them, making sure their latches were engaged. I stoked the fire higher, put on the kettle for more tea, tried to convince myself I'd seen nothing but a momentary hallucination brought on by isolation and the hypnotic drumming of the rain. It was working, too. My heartbeat had almost returned to normal when I heard it. Footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate steps moving from one end of the cabin to the other. Too heavy to be an animal. Too rhythmic to be debris from the storm. I stood in the center of the main room, looking up at the ceiling, tracking the sound as it crossed directly overhead. The footsteps reached the far edge of the roof and stopped. Silence stretched for 10, 15 seconds. Then came a new sound, a slow, deliberate scratching directly above the main room, like someone or something dragging their nails across the metal roofing. The sound moved, forming a pattern. A circle, I realized. Something was drawing a circle on my roof. The scratching stopped. The kettle began to whistle, making me jump. I turned off the stove with shaking hands, no longer interested in tea. That's when I noticed the temperature. It was dropping rapidly, my breath fog in front of my face. The fire in the wood stove, which had been roaring moments before, was now barely a flicker, as if something were smothering it without extinguishing it completely. A cold unlike anything I'd ever experienced seeped into the cabin. Not the natural chill of a winter night, but something deeper, something that reached inside you and gripped your very core. And with that cold came a smell, earthy, damp, like freshly turned soil mixed with something metallic, like blood and wet leaves. The lights flickered once, twice, and died. The minimal emergency lighting kicked in, casting a weak red glow over the cabin. The shadows seemed to deepen, to move of their own accord. I stood my ground, pistol raised, turning slowly, trying to watch all corners of the room at once. The torch in my other hand seemed weaker now, its beam barely cutting through the unnatural darkness that had filled the cabin. "What do you want?" I asked aloud, surprised at the steadiness of my voice. No answer came, but the scratching on the roof resumed. Faster now, more urgent. Not circles anymore, but straight lines cross-hatching, forming a pattern I couldn't discern. A loud crack split the silence. The main window of the cabin, splintering from top to bottom though no object had struck it. The glass held in its frame, but only just a web of fractures turning it opaque. As I watched, frost began to form on the broken window, spreading outward from the center of the impact. But this wasn't natural frost. It was forming patterns, symbols I didn't recognize, flowing across the glass as if drawn by an invisible hand. My radio burst to life with a scream of static, so loud I nearly dropped it. Through the white noise, I could just make out a voice, not headquarters, not any of my fellow rangers, but something else, something speaking in words that weren't quite words. The voice rose and fell in an uneven cadence, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a shout, always unintelligible yet somehow conveying meaning. Malevolence, hunger, ancient, patient hunger. I threw the radio down. It continued to emit that terrible static speech even after it hit the floor, even after it should have been broken from the impact. The temperature dropped further. The emergency lights faded to almost nothing. The shadows in the corners of the room began to move, to flow toward the center where I stood, as if reaching for me. And I realized with sudden, horrifying clarity that I wasn't facing some lost hiker or local prankster, or even a wild animal. Something had come down from the deep woods. Something old. Something that had been waiting. The main door began to rattle in its frame, but not the wind. The movement was too regular, too deliberate, like someone turning the handle, finding it locked, and now trying to force it. Wood creaked, metal groaned. The hinges began to bend inward. I raised my pistol, aiming at the door, knowing even as I did that it would be useless against whatever was trying to get in. The door bulged inward. It was splintering, and then stopped. Everything stopped. The scratching on the roof, the rattling door, the static speech from the radio. Even the rain seemed to pause. Complete, utter silence fell. A sense of pressure built in my ears, as if I'd suddenly descended deep underwater. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. The darkness pulsed like a heartbeat. And in that terrible silence, I heard it, a whisper, not from outside, but inside my own head. Let me in. My hand moved toward the door of its own accord. I fought it, muscles straining against an invisible force that was not my own will. My arms shook with the effort of resistance. Let me in, Ranger Cooper. I come such a long way to see you. My name. It knew my name. No, I managed to say through gritted teeth. But I brought you something. The voice continued, almost gentle now. Someone you've been looking for. The pressure increased. Blood roared in my ears. My vision began to darken at the edges. Don't you want to know what happened to the Blackwood girl? The name hit me like a physical blow. Eliza Blackwood, a 19-year-old hiker who had vanished in the northern sector 3 months earlier. Despite extensive searches, no trace of her had ever been found. You don't have her, I said, fighting to remain standing as the pressure in my head built to near unbearable levels. But I do, the voice whispered. I have all of them. Everyone who's ever been lost in these woods. They're with me, part of me. I can show you. The broken window began to change, the frost patterns flowing together, forming an image, a face, Eliza's face, just as it had appeared on the missing persons flyer, but wrong somehow, the proportions slightly off, the eyes too wide, too fixed, a puppet-like approximation created by something that didn't fully understand human features. Let me in, and I'll tell you where to find her. My resolve wavered, if there was even a chance. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. Whatever this thing was, it didn't have answers, only hunger. No, I said again, more firmly this time. The face in the frost contorted, stretching into something no longer human, no longer recognizable. The pressure in my head peaked, bringing with it a pain so intense I thought my skull would shatter. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The pressure released. The temperature began to rise. The emergency lights brightened. The fire in the wood stove leapt back to life as if it had never faded. Outside, the rain resumed its steady drumming on the roof. I stood motionless in the center of the room, waiting for whatever would come next. But nothing did. The presence, wherever it had been, was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire roaring, my pistol loaded and my back to the wall, watching both doors until dawn finally broke, gray and misty through the fractured window. With the first light came the radio, crackling to life of its own accord. Outpost 17, this is headquarters. Do you copy? We lost contact in the storm. Cooper, are you there? Over. My hand shook as I picked up the handset. This is Cooper. I'm here. Over. Thank God, came the reply. Storm took out communications across the northern sector. Everything okay out there? Over. I looked at the shattered window, at the deep scratches visible in the wooden door frame, at the satellite phone that now showed full battery and signal, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Cooper? You there? Over. I'm here, I said. I need to report an incident. 3 days later, a maintenance team arrived to repair the window and inspect the roof. They found nothing to explain the deep gouges in the metal. Gouges that, when photographed from above, formed a pattern almost like writing in a language none of us recognized. The official report attributes the incident to extreme weather conditions and possible wildlife activity. It notes that isolation and storm stress may have contributed to perceptual abnormalities on my part. I requested a transfer the following week. No one questioned it. Rangers rarely last long at Outpost 17. But here's what keeps me awake on rainy nights like this. 2 things happened in the weeks after my encounter. First, during a routine survey of the northern sector, a geology team discovered a cave entrance that had been exposed by a recent landslide. Inside were items belonging to hikers who had gone missing over the past 50 years, including Eliza Blackwood's backpack. But no bodies. Never any bodies. Second, the symbols scratched into my roof? A linguistics professor. I showed them, said they resembled Proto-Germanic runes, but arranged in a syntax he'd never seen before. When he ran them through a database, the closest translation he could provide was, I am patient. I will wait. I haven't set foot in the northern sector since. But sometimes, on nights when the rain is heavy and the wind howls just right, I hear those 3 sharp knocks on my door. And each time, it takes every ounce of courage I possess not to answer, not to let it in, because it's still out there, walking among the pines, waiting. And I fear that next time, my will might not be strong enough to resist. Do you hear that? That soft tapping at your window? It's just the rain. I hope. Do you hear how the rain sounds on your roof? That steady patter, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce. Rain has a voice all its own, doesn't it? But the rain here in Silverwood National Park sounds different, especially at night, especially deep in the old growth forest where the ancient pines tower overhead like silent sentinels, where the rain must filter through layers of branches before it ever reaches the ground. That's where I was 5 years ago, when I encountered something I still cannot explain. I've been a forest ranger for nearly 20 years now, the last 12 at Silverwood. Most people know it for the scenic vistas and well-maintained hiking trails along the eastern ridge. But the western section, what we call the Old Forest, is different, wilder, virtually untouched. The trees there are centuries old, some dating back nearly 1,000 years. The forest floor is a thick carpet of moss and ferns, and the silence, it's like nothing you've ever experienced. An ancient, watchful silence that seems to absorb all sound. We don't encourage casual hikers to venture there. The trails are minimal, often overgrown, and it's easy to become disoriented. Mobile phones don't work in the deep valleys. GPS signals are unreliable at best, but every season, we still get a handful of experienced backpackers who want to explore the old forest. Most return with awestruck expressions, talking about the cathedral-like groves and the profound sense of peace. Most, but not all. That October had been unusually wet, even for our typically rainy region. 3 weeks of near-constant precipitation had turned the trails to mud and swollen the streams to dangerous levels. We closed most of the park to visitors, keeping only the main eastern trails open where the terrain was less treacherous. The call came in just as I was preparing to end my shift. A woman, her voice tight with anxiety, reporting that her husband had returned from a 4-day trek in the western section. He was an experienced outdoorsman, she emphasized. He'd been coming to Silverwood for years. But he should have been back yesterday, and he always stuck to his itinerary. He knows the old forest better than most, she said, a slight tremor in her voice. This isn't like him. I took down the details. Nathan Cooper, 42, hiking alone, last seen entering the Westridge Trail 4 days earlier. He'd planned to camp at Mirror Lake the first night, then follow the Forgotten Trail loop back toward the Westridge Junction. The Forgotten Trail. Something cold settled in my stomach when she mentioned it. Most rangers at Silverwood know to avoid that particular path. Not for any official reason. It appears on all the maps. Technically remains open to hikers. But there's something about it that feels wrong. Too quiet. Too dark. Even at midday. Animals avoid it. Birds fall silent when you enter that stretch of forest. And people have gone missing there before. We'll begin searching immediately, I told her, though standard protocol would have called for waiting until morning. But with the weather conditions and the specific location, well, some instinct told me that waiting was an option. My colleague, Ranger Martinez, volunteered to join me. We gathered our emergency gear, torches, first aid supplies, emergency beacons, extra rations, and headed out in the park vehicle as the day's light was already fading. The rain, which had lessened briefly that afternoon, began to intensify again as we drove toward the western trailhead. Cooper went out in this weather voluntarily? Martinez asked, squinting through the windscreen as the wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour. Apparently he's somewhat of a regular. Comes every autumn, according to his wife. She said he, quote, finds peace in the rain. Martinez shook his head. There's peace, and then there's foolhardiness. We reached the Westridge Trailhead just as true darkness was settling. The rain had become a steady, soaking downpour that limited visibility and transformed the path into a muddy stream in places. Our torch beams seemed feeble against the encompassing blackness of forest. We'll check the trail registry first, I said, heading for the small wooden box mounted near the trailhead sign. Inside was a weatherproof logbook where hikers recorded their entry and expected return. Cooper had indeed signed in 4 days earlier. His entry was brief. And Cooper solo for day loop via Forgotten Trail. Expected return October 17th. That was yesterday, Martinez noted, looking over my shoulder. I nodded, continuing to scan the logbook. No one else had signed in or out in the past week. We were likely alone in this section of park. The first mile of the Westridge Trail was relatively easygoing, despite the rain and darkness. The path was wide, well-maintained, gently sloping upward through mixed forest. We called out periodically, Nathan Cooper, park rangers. But our voices seemed swallowed by the rain and the dense vegetation. At the 1 mile marker, the trail forked. Left continued along Westridge toward the park's northern boundary. Right descended into a valley, becoming the path to Mirror Lake. And eventually, to the Forgotten Trail. We took the right fork, and it was as if we'd stepped into a different forest entirely. The trees here were older, larger, their canopies creating a ceiling so dense that even the rain seemed muted. Our torch beams barely penetrated the darkness ahead. The path narrowed, became steeper, the mud slicker underfoot. Cooper, Nathan Cooper. We continued calling, more frequently now. But the forest remained eerily silent apart from the muffled patter of rain on leaves. We reached Mirror Lake around 9 p.m. It wasn't much of a lake, more a large, deep pond nestled in a rocky depression. Its name came from the unusual stillness of its surface, which on clear days perfectly reflected the surrounding trees. Tonight, in the rain and darkness, it was just a black void. The designated camping area was empty, no tent, no signs of recent use. He might have moved on, Martinez suggested. If he was following his itinerary, he would have been here 3 nights ago. I nodded, but something felt off. I swept my torch around the clearing more carefully. The ground showed no obvious signs of recent camping. No compressed grass where a tent might have stood. No scuffed earth around the fire ring. I'm not sure he was ever here, I said slowly. Martinez frowned. Then where would he have gone? This is the only approved camping spot on this section of trail. I had no answer. We decided to continue following Cooper's planned route, which meant taking Forgotten Trail, a 2-mile loop that eventually rejoined the path back to Westridge. The entrance of Forgotten Trail was barely visible, a narrow gap between 2 massive pines, marked only by a weather-beaten wooden sign. As we approached, my torch caught something reflective on the ground near the trail marker. A backpack, high-end, the kind serious hikers invest in, partially covered by fallen leaves and debris, as if it had been there for some time, but not damaged enough to have weathered multiple storms. Martinez reached it first. Cooper was written on the interior label in permanent marker. We searched the pack thoroughly. All the essentials were still there: water filter, first aid kit, cooking equipment. Even his wallet with ID confirming it was indeed Nathan Cooper's. The only things missing appear to be a torch and perhaps a rain jacket. This doesn't make sense, Martinez said, looking around the clearing. Why would he abandon his pack? And where was he planning to sleep? His tent is still here. The questions hung in the damp air, unanswered. We radioed our discovery to headquarters. They would notify Cooper's wife and send additional search teams at first light. In the meantime, we were to continue searching as conditions allowed. We should check the Forgotten Trail, I said, though a part of me was reluctant to venture down that path, especially at night, in the rain. Martinez seemed to share my unease. Maybe we should wait for backup. If he's injured somewhere along that trail, we might need more hands for extraction. It was a sensible suggestion, a responsible one, but something, intuition perhaps, or something more primal, told me that waiting wasn't an option. You can stay with the pack, I offered. I'll do a preliminary sweep of the trail, just to see if there are any obvious signs. Martinez hesitated, then shook his head. No way am I letting you go alone. We stick together. And so we entered the Forgotten Trail, the darkness of the forest seeming to deepen with each step away from Mirror Lake. The rain continued its steady patter, but even that familiar sound seemed different here, muffled, distant, as if we were hearing it through layers of something other than just tree canopy. Our torch beams caught the glistening wetness of leaves, the slick surface of ancient tree trunks, but somehow failed to properly illuminate the path ahead. Cooper, Nathan Cooper, we called periodically, our voices sounding flat and directionless in the dense air. The trail wound deeper into forest, descending gently at first, then more steeply into a narrow ravine. The vegetation changed subtly, more ferns, more moss, species that thrive in perpetual dampness and minimal light. The trees grew closer together, their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, almost like, does it seem like the trees are watching us? Martinez whispered, his voice tight. I'd been thinking the exact same thing, but hadn't wanted to voice it. The feeling of being observed was palpable, a pressure against my skin that had nothing to do with the damp air. It's just an old forest, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Old trees can take on strange shapes. Martinez didn't look convinced, but we pressed on. About half a mile along the Forgotten Trail, we came to a small clearing, not a natural one, but a place where several massive trees had fallen, perhaps in some long-ago storm, creating a gap in the otherwise dense canopy. Rain fell more heavily here, directly from the sky rather than filtered through layers of leaves. And there, in the center of the clearing, was a torch. Not just any torch. a high-end model identical to the one I carried. Standard equipment for serious hikers and rangers alike. I approached it carefully. The torch was standing upright in the mud, as if deliberately placed. Its beam was on, pointing straight upward into the rain, creating an eerie column of light in which raindrops became briefly visible before vanishing again into the darkness. "Cooper?" I called, my voice sounding thin in the open space. "Nathan Cooper?" No response but the rain. I reached for the torch, hesitated, then picked it up. It was surprisingly warm to the touch, the battery clearly not depleted despite having been left on for an unknown period. "This has to be his," Martinez said, examining it. "But why leave it standing like that? And where is he?" I swept my own torch around the clearing. The ground was muddy, but any footprints had been washed away by the persistent rain. No other equipment, no clothing, no signs of struggle or injury, just a lone torch, standing like a sentinel in the night. "Look at this," Martinez said suddenly, pointing to something at the edge of the clearing. I directed my beam where he indicated. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just a wall of dense forest that surrounded the clearing. Then I noticed what caught his attention. A gap in the trees, a darkness deeper than the surrounding night. It wasn't on any map. The Forgotten Trail was supposed to continue straight through the clearing, not veer off into that ominous void. "That's not right," I said, checking my GPS unit. The signal was weak, fluctuating wildly, but it clearly showed the trail continuing forward, not turning toward that gap. "Could be an animal path," Martinez suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We approached cautiously. Up close, it became clear this was no casual game trail. The opening was wide enough for a person to walk through comfortably. The vegetation cleared with what seemed like purpose. On either side stood two ancient pines, their trunks gnarled and twisted in a way that gave the unsettling impression of figures frozen in the act of turning to watch those who passed between them. "I don't like this," Martinez muttered. I didn't either, but I felt a growing certainty that if we wanted to find Nathan Cooper, this unmarked path was where we needed to go. "Hello," I called into the darkness beyond the opening. "Cooper, can you hear me?" Something changed in the quality of the silence that answered. It was still silence, but somehow charged, attentive, as if the forest had been merely quiet before, but was now actively listening. I took a step toward the opening. Martinez grabbed my arm. "Evans, wait. This isn't right. This path isn't on any map. We should go back, get more people, return in daylight." All reasonable suggestions. The sensible course of action. And yet, what if he's injured down there? I said, in this weather, waiting until morning could mean. I didn't finish the sentence. We both knew the risk of exposure, especially if Cooper was hurt and unable to move. Martinez released my arm with obvious reluctance. We go together, and we mark our path. He pulled a roll of bright orange surveyor's tape from his pack. Every 20 paces, I'm tying a marker, and we're checking in with HQ every 10 minutes. I nodded, relief mixing with a darker anticipation as we stepped between the watchful trees onto the unmarked path. The change was immediate and disorienting. The forest closed around us in a way that felt almost physical, the darkness deepening to an impossible degree. Our torch beam seemed to penetrate only a few feet ahead before the light was simply absorbed. The rain, which had been a constant presence all evening, now sounded wrong, arrhythmic, sometimes seeming to pause altogether for several seconds before resuming with increasing intensity. "Cooper," I called, my voice sounding muffled, as if I were shouting underwater. "Nathan Cooper." We proceeded slowly, Martinez carefully marking our trail with the orange tape. The path descended steeply, sometimes requiring us to hold on to tree roots or rocks to maintain balance on the slippery ground. The vegetation grew stranger the further we went. Ferns of varieties I didn't recognize. Fungi that seemed to glow faintly with inner phosphorescence. Moss so thick it looked like green velvet draped over every surface. Checking with HQ, I reminded Martinez when we'd been on the unmarked path for what felt like 10 minutes. He raised his radio. Ranger Martinez to headquarters, checking in. We're currently investigating an unmarked trail off the Forgotten Trail loop. Do you copy? Static answered him. He tried again, adjusting the frequency. Nothing but white noise. Signals blocked by the terrain, he said, but the look he gave me suggested he wasn't sure that was the explanation. We continued downward, the path narrowing further, the trees pressing closer. The sense of being watched intensified with every step, until it was almost a physical weight on my skin. The rain seemed to be easing, or perhaps the canopy had simply grown so dense that little moisture penetrated to where we walked. And then, suddenly, the path ended at the mouth of a cave. It wasn't a large opening, perhaps 4 feet high, half as wide, but it was unmistakably artificial. The rock around the entrance had been worked, smoothed, with what appeared to be symbols carved at regular intervals around the perimeter. Not modern graffiti, but something much older, more deliberate. Our torch beams revealed a tunnel leading into darkness. No way, Martinez said flatly. Absolutely not. We are not going in there. I had to agree. Cave rescues required specialized equipment and training, neither of which we had with us. If Cooper had somehow found this place and ventured inside, we would need a proper team to follow. I raised my torch to examine the symbols carved around the entrance. They weren't from any language or culture I recognized. Not Native American pictographs, not European runes, not Asian characters. They seemed to rise slightly in the torchlight, as if the shadows they cast were moving independently of our light source. We need to go back, Martinez said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Now. I nodded, still transfixed by those strange carvings. We'll mark the location, come back with proper team. As I turned to go, my torch caught something just inside the cave entrance. Something that stopped me cold. A rain jacket. Modern. High-end weatherproof material, bright blue. The exact model our missing hiker had been described as wearing. Martinez, I said quietly. Look. He saw it too. That's Cooper's jacket. Has to be. We looked at each other. The same terrible understanding passing between us. If that was Cooper's jacket, and it was just inside the cave entrance. Cooper! I shouted into the cave, my voice echoing strangely, coming back distorted, as if from a much larger space than the small opening suggested. Nathan Cooper, park rangers. Can you hear us? Silence, but not empty silence. Listening silence. We have to check, I said, already knowing Martinez would object. Evans, no. We're not equipped for cave rescue. We mark the spot, we go back, we bring a proper team. And if he's just inside, injured, in the time it takes us to go back and return with a team, Martinez swore under his breath. 5 minutes. We looked just inside the entrance. No further. And we stay together. I nodded, already ducking into the low opening, my torch leading the way. The cave mouth opened into a tunnel that descended gently for about 30 feet before widening into a chamber roughly the size of a small bedroom. The walls were the same worked stone as the entrance, smooth and covered in those strange, writhing symbols. The air was surprisingly warm and dry, compared to the damp forest outside. The jacket lay on the floor of this chamber, carefully folded, as if placed there deliberately. Beside it was a pair of hiking boots, similarly arranged. Cooper's, presumably, but no sign of Cooper himself. This makes no sense, Martinez whispered, his voice tight. Why would he leave his boots? I swept my torch around the chamber. There was only one exit besides the way we had entered. Another tunnel leading deeper into the earth, this one slightly larger than the entrance passage. Cooper? I called again, directed my voice toward that inner tunnel. Nathan Cooper? This time, something answered. Not a voice, not a sound, exactly. More like a change in the air, a thickening, a presence, and then movement in the inner tunnel. A shadow shifting against shadows. Something coming toward us. Martinez saw it too. He grabbed my arm. Out! Now! We didn't need to discuss it. We turned as one and hurried back up the entrance tunnel. Not quite running, but moving with urgent purpose. Behind us, the quality of darkness in the chamber seemed to intensify, to spill into the tunnel like a liquid, pursuing us. We burst out into the forest, the cool, damp air shock after the warm dryness of the cave. Without discussing it, we continued up the path, following Martinez's orange markers, moving as quickly as we dared on the slippery ground. Neither of us said it, but I know we both felt it. Something was following us. Not footsteps, not a physical presence, but a pressure in the air behind us, a weight that grew with every marker we passed. The rain had stopped entirely. I realized suddenly. The forest was utterly silent except for our labored breathing and the squelch of our boots in the mud. No rain patter, no night insects, no distant owl calls, nothing. We reached the clearing with the still-standing torch, except it wasn't standing anymore. It lay on its side in the mud, switched off. I thought you took that torch, Martinez said, his voice barely above a whisper. I did. I held up Cooper's torch, still clutched in my left hand alongside my own. We looked at the third torch lying in the mud, identical to the others. Impossible. Martinez broke into a run then, and I followed, up the steep path, past twisted trees that seemed to lean closer as we passed, through undergrowth that appeared to grab at our clothing with deliberate malice. The darkness pressed around us, our torch beam seeming to weaken with each passing minute. When we finally burst out onto the main forgotten trail, the relief was palpable. Here, the rain had resumed its normal pattern. Here, the darkness was just darkness, not the living absence of light we'd experienced on that unmarked path. We didn't stop. We continued at a fast walk all the way back to Mirror Lake, where Cooper's backpack still lay where we'd found it. Without discussing it, we gathered it up and kept moving back up the trail toward Westridge. We didn't speak until we reached the parked vehicle. Didn't need to. We both knew what had happened back there defied rational explanation. The official report states that Nathan Cooper remains missing, presumed dead from exposure or injury in a remote section of Silverwood National Park. It notes that weather conditions hampered search efforts, and that Cooper's backpack was recovered, suggesting he may have become disoriented and separated from his equipment. It does not mention the unmarked path, the impossible cave, the third torch. I requested all my shift be assigned to the eastern section of the park now. I don't go into the old forest anymore. Don't walk the forgotten trail. But sometimes on nights like this, when the rain falls heavily and the darkness gathers outside my windows, I think about that cave, those symbols, that sense of being watched by something ancient and patient. And I wonder about Nathan Cooper, not where his body might lie. I'm fairly certain no physical remains will ever be found. No, I wonder if he's still down there, still walking deeper into tunnels that lead to places I can barely imagine. Places that were never meant for human eyes. Or worse, I wonder if whatever was in that cave is wearing a skin now, walking among us, learning our ways, preparing. The rain's getting heavier now, isn't it? That drumming on your roof, your windows. Listen carefully. Does it still sound like rain to you? Or does it sound like something else? Something tapping, asking to be let in.